Hello, this is Tom Kemp. I'm the CEO of Centrify Corporation, and welcome to yet another video Chalk Talk. Today I'm joined with Corey Williams. Corey is our Director of Product Management for our applications and our auditing products, and today we're going to talk about direct control for SAP. So Corey, let's jump right into it. So what is direct control for SAP?
Direct control for SAP is a solution that we've brought to market that sits on top of our primary product, direct control, to provide single sign-on functionality for end users using SAP GUI via their Active Directory account.
Okay, and so this requires our software at the Unix level, right? And also there's a component at the Windows level as well. So
yeah, so the solution that we've brought to market is to provide SAP, which is running on Unix, the ability to integrate with an Active Directory environment. And it's based on our flagship technology called Direct Control, which integrates the Unix OS to Active Directory and provides a secure stack which then can be integrated with SAP. And we extend both SAP and the SAP GUI to be able to leverage that infrastructure.
okay, so what end users get is when they launch or when they fire up their Windows PC, they'll get a Kerberos ticket. And so what is what would happen if they didn't have our solution?
That's a good question. So today, the way that most of our customers and users are experiencing SAP is through the built-in sign-on process that you get with SAP. SAP refers to it as the unsecure process, where you actually type in a username and password in SAP GUI when you actually go to connect to the server. And that account is actually stored in the SAP server and is not integrated with any outside account. What our solution does is associate that account with an Active Directory account and then use the built-in mechanisms that Windows provides, like Kerberos, to actually do the authentication, as well as use that to secure the communication between SAP GUI and the SAP server.
So one of the value propositions is that, as I was saying before, once they log in, the end user by default gets their Kerberos ticket, and now that Kerberos ticket, even though it's talking to a non-Microsoft operating system and a non-Microsoft server, in this case SAP, they'll be able to silently authenticate into the corresponding application.
Yeah, I find it helps to think about the example we're all familiar with. When you log into your Windows desktop today and you go to check your email, you open up Outlook, and somehow it just knows who you are, what your account is, and it lets you write into your email without prompting you for a username and password. The experience for the end user is very similar in this case. What's happening underneath the covers is that Outlook is actually taking the Kerberos ticket that's provided to the user when they log into Windows initially, and it's using that ticket to request access to the Exchange server when Outlook is launched. And so when it requests access to the Exchange server, it's provided a temporary token to gain access to the Exchange server, and then Outlook automatically provides that to Exchange server and automatically gets to the right account as the right user. So with SAP, our solution does the same thing underneath the covers. We take that same Kerberos ticket you got when you logged on to Windows. We use it to request access from Active Directory for access to the SAP server that we want to log into. And then the SAP GUI takes that service request and actually provides it to the SAP server. The SAP server is smart enough to be able to recognize this as a Kerberos request, and it provides that ticket to Direct Control, which validates the ticket and allows the user to get access to their account.
So that's the benefit from an end user perspective. It's actually not single sign-on, it's actually silent authentication right in. And before we move into the benefits to the IT, which is where my question is, does this work with end users that may have access to multiple applications? Does this...
Yes, this is the same mechanism that Microsoft has integrated into a lot of their different services. And so that same Kerberos mechanism has been built into Windows for a very long time now and is used to gain access to all the different Microsoft systems. What Centrify has done is extend that to non-Microsoft systems like not only Unix and Linux, but web applications, databases, other ERP applications, and so forth.
And then even within SAP, if they had access to multiple accounts payable, accounts receivable, it's completely seamless.
It's completely seamless. The way SAP works is that they have a foundational component which they call their basis product. That's what we refer to when we say NetWeaver.
Okay.
And that foundational component does all of the authentication. Now, on top of that foundation is the application components that you're talking about that run, like finance or accounts payable or warehouse or employee self-service or whatever it might be.
So this would be applicable to everything built on top of that foundation that SAP has. And so I think I talked to you in the past, and we've had situations where the end users were given dozens of usernames and passwords because they needed to access all the different applications.
True. One of the things that we found is, with large SAP deployments is that there's different servers for different functions. So not every SAP server has all the applications deployed. There'll be a set of SAP servers for finance and a set for manufacturing and a set for distribution and so forth. And each of those servers has individual user accounts on each one. And even if there's mechanisms to keep them in sync, there's still individual accounts that need to be managed, turned on and off. If a user changes jobs or leaves the company, you actually have to go and physically disable their accounts in all these different servers. They may in fact have different usernames and passwords for each one of those servers. So that it's the same problem if I had a lot of different applications in my enterprise. Within SAP itself, there's a lot of instances of the application that may have their own accounts.
So we cover all that. Yeah. So completely seamless from an end user perspective. So what are the benefits? Clearly there's some significant benefit from an end user perspective. So what is IT personnel, the people responsible for SAP, kind of at the back end, what are some of the benefits they get?
Well, one of the main motivations we see people addressing single sign-on projects for is because a large end user population, even a small problem, can be amplified very quickly. So in the case of SAP, what we hear from our customers is that a lot of users are getting locked out of accounts because they've tried their password. They only maybe access their account once a month, and so they always forget their password. They always lock themselves out. They end up calling the help desk or an SAP administrator. And if you multiply that by 1,000 or 10,000 or 30,000 users, that can be a very, very expensive proposition. So there's the basic end user productivity and reduction of help desk costs. That is sort of the foundation for any ROI. But it actually goes beyond that because you've kind of improved the user experience through the silent sign-on using Active Directory. Now I have some controls that I didn't have before. Since we're using the Active Directory user account, I can centrally manage all of the policies that I'm being forced to related to password aging or account naming and so forth. I can do those in one single place. And perhaps the best reason is because now I have one place to turn off access to all of the SAP servers and anything else that's integrated with Active Directory in one place. I can actually disable that user's account when they leave the company, and they won't have access to log into any of those applications anymore, including SAP.
So it sounds like there's a benefit from an efficiency and productivity for the end user, but the IT staff will have efficiency and productivity in terms of just reducing calls into the help desk about password resets, but then this also significantly benefits things from a security perspective in terms of a single point of control, a single point of access, consistent security password policies as well. Okay, so can you start diagramming for myself and the people watching how this actually works, like what components are installed in what locations?
Yeah, let me start out with an example of how Kerberos works. I walked you through verbally, but let me draw a picture of that. And then from that, I'll draw a second picture which puts the components in their place and how that same interaction works at the component level, and we can see kind of how the flow of this authentication works. So when the end user comes in the morning, what they do is they log into their Windows desktop. This would be a Windows or an XP box. It could actually be a Mac environment as well. We actually help integrate Macs into a Active Directory environment just like we do Unix and Linux servers. And what happens is when I log in, I actually receive a Kerberos ticket. And that Kerberos ticket is something that allows me for this session to be identified for any access requests to services that live out on the network. And so what happens is I log in the morning, I get this Kerberos ticket, now I'm ready to get into SAP. So I launch SAP GUI, and I'm given a list of servers that I can log into. When I click one of those to log in, I'm actually going out to Active Directory, and Active Directory is what provides the Kerberos infrastructure that I need to do this request. I use my Kerberos ticket to request access to the service for that particular SAP server. So I'm given back a service request that SAP GUI then can provide to the SAP server. The SAP server is actually intercepting this request and saying, okay, I see that you're trying to log in using your Kerberos identity. It actually intercepts that ticket and it provides it to our direct control agent. And so if I just illustrate here that this server is actually connected to Active Directory through our direct control agent, what happens is that request is then intercepted and validated against the Kerberos environment that Active Directory sets up. So once that ticket is validated, I can say, okay, the user can gain access to this service, and SAP Server actually allows the user right in. And this is what happens underneath the covers, but the end user never really sees anything happen. They ask for access to a particular server, and they're given nearly immediate access to the application they were trying to get into.
So how does the Centrify agent interface with the actual SAP server?
So let's drill down underneath the covers a little bit. And I'm gonna erase this. And I'll show you each of these different components, but we'll blow them out into the individual technical pieces, okay? So on the Windows box, I have SAP GUI. And SAP GUI actually, and this is one component, it actually has a layer called SNC. SNC stands for Secure Network Communications. This is a layer that SAP provided to third-party security vendors like Centrify to be able to extend their environment to secure it. And what happens here is we actually have a component which we call the Centrify SAP Client Agent. And what the client agent does is it bridges between SNC and the Kerberos environment within Windows XP or Windows Vista. The technical term is called SSPI, or the Security Services API that Microsoft exposes. So these are sort of the Windows box components that get involved here. We provide this agent. SAP GUI already has SNC built into it, and the SSPI and all the interfaces needed to access Active Directory are built into Windows.
Now, do we provide with that client agent, the customer has to deploy that on the actual clients. Do we provide a means or mechanism to help them deploy that?
Yeah, there's a few different approaches to doing this. We do provide an MSI, which installs it directly on the box. Underneath the covers, it's just a single DLL and an environment variable. Those can get set in a couple different ways. They can get set through group policy from Active Directory for a standard configuration on the box, or if you use another desktop management product to distribute your software, you can make it available through that as well. So you've got a few different options to get it installed on those boxes.
It sounds like because it's MSI, any software distribution product.
Yeah, it would be the standard way that you manage your desktops now. Would fit right into that environment.
And it sounds like it's just a DLL and some sort of registry or environment.
It's just an environment variable and a DLL.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay. So in Active Directory, most people think of Active Directory as a domain controller, and that's true. So there's this domain controller component. But the domain controller also doubles as the Kerberos domain controller. So it provides both the networking services and the Kerberos services. And I'll just put KDC, which is what the Kerberos controller is known for. And so when the client agent via SAP GUI is asking for this service ticket, what's happening is that it's actually going out to the KDC and receiving back a service ticket for that user. So that's sort of step one. Okay. After I've logged in and now I'm requesting access. Okay, so that's the client side. Here's the Active Directory side. Now let's look at the SAP server.
And I take it there's no additional software required at the domain controller.
Yeah, that's a nice thing about Centrify's solution as compared to a lot of other alternatives. We don't require any third-party server that we go through. We don't require any software to be installed on any domain controllers. In fact, we don't even require any schema extensions in Active Directory itself. It all uses the existing infrastructure you have. And when I point out the components that are Centrify specific, those will be the only additional components that you put into your environment. So we have a very clean architecture in terms of installation and management. As a matter of fact, the most work that you'll do in deploying this SAP solution will be in the change management around teaching users that there's a different way to log in now that's easier. The actual deployment is very, very straightforward, as we'll find out.
That's great.
So on the SAP server, there's and I'll just call it NetWeaver. There actually may be applications on top of it, but when I'm doing a login request, it always gets passed down to NetWeaver. NetWeaver actually has an applications layer, an application server layer, and a network layer. In that network layer is actually where the SNC layer resides. So it's very similar to the client side. There's an SNC layer that allows third-party components to be plugged into it.
And this is an SAP provided interface, and so the interface that we're using is provided and supported by SAP.
Yeah, and SNC, Secure Network Communications, has actually been around for more than a decade at SAP. And in fact, it hasn't changed in terms of its specifications. So when we certified our solution with SAP, which I'll get to in a little while, we actually supported for all of their currently supported versions, all the way back to 4.0 of R3. And there's been about 5 releases since then.
Oh, that's great.
So the NetWeaver server via SNC is passing this service ticket request. And so let's go ahead and draw an arrow here for step 2. And that service ticket is then being intercepted and being passed to Centrify's DirectControl. And the way it's doing that is through the Centrify server, SAP server agent. So it's an analogous component here that's bridging SNC in the Windows case to something called the SSPI. In the Unix Linux case, there's actually a standard called the GSS API. And GSS API stands for Generic Security Services API. It's how our Kerberos stack is exposed. This is an industry standard. It's been around for a while. It was developed as part of delivering this Kerberos stack to market. And the GSS API is very similar to the SSPI. SSPI is just Microsoft's flavor of that.
Okay.
And that's actually exposed, that API is actually exposed via DirectControl.
So this is our core agent that runs on the Unix and Linux box.
Yeah, and DirectControl it's got a few pieces to it. Specifically in terms of single sign-on for SAP, it's what provides the Kerberos stack. And the Kerberos stack is something that is managed from Active Directory to this particular box. So whenever a request comes through, DirectControl is validating this request against the Kerberos stack. And what we do is we actually manage that Kerberos stack to keep it in sync with Active Directory. And there's a few different pieces that we manage. One is the automatic setup and configuration for that platform. We set up to make sure that the time synchronization is in order because Kerberos doesn't work well in environments where the time skew is too large. It sets up, it monitors for any password changes for the system account and so forth. There's many things we do to make it just work out of the box. And that's one of the challenging pieces, as we'll find out later, of trying to do this on your own, is setting up a Kerberos environment that actually works and actually is stable and maintained in that particular environment. But DirectControl, the agent, actually does a couple of other things. The DirectControl agent also helps secure the underlying OS. And that's where our flagship technology has come from. We entered this market by helping to secure the underlying Unix and Linux environment against Active Directory. And specifically what we provide is the ability to control who has access to which boxes using their Active Directory account. We also have the ability to control at a role-based level what they can do when they're on those boxes. So if you've got an SAP administrator, there's a set of commands that they need to run. We can actually set up centrally in Active Directory who those administrators are, what they can do on their box, even when they can do it. And we can enforce that for roles like the SAP administrator, the database backup guy, the OS administrator, and that provides a very clean way of closing the loop on all of the security policies and other compliance-related issues that you may have on these boxes. Okay, so SNC intercepts this request. It's validated via the GSS API against the direct control managed Kerberos stack, and then once that request is validated, the user now has access to the application that they requested. And what's interesting about this is not only are we providing the authentication mechanism through Kerberos, like I just described, we're using that same Kerberos ticket to actually secure the communication between SAP GUI and NetWeaver. And the reason this is important is because anybody with a little bit of technical ability is actually able to look on the wire and see the user's login and password and the data that gets sent between the client and the server. That's the default mode that SAP is installed in. If you want to secure that communication, either by signing it to ensure that it hasn't changed in flight, or by encrypting it to ensure that no one can actually read the data, you have to use a third-party product that's SNC certified. And we provide that additional capability in addition to authentication.
So that's, okay, so obviously that gets to your point about the IT people, I mean the end users get the single sign-on. What IT get is the fact that everything's being leveraged off AD. So if you disable a user there, then the person is disabled from accessing not only the Windows system, the Unix system, but the actual application.
Correct.
You have the security policies centrally within AD, and then because of the leveraging of Kerberos, the communication is encrypted across the wire. So that's another security benefit. So one question I have is so I understand the component, the DLL, and the environment variable that we deploy on the Windows. I understand the plugin on top of the direct control agent, but historically people have already logged into their SAP with some sort of user ID, right? And so now we're saying you don't have to use that user ID anymore. Right. So how does SAP know about, you know, the mapping between the user and Active Directory with the corresponding Kerberos ticket?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it gets to the configuration steps that are involved in setting this environment up. So on the NetWeaver side, the user accounts for all of the applications that SAP exposes still exists. And it's still managed in the same way. So if you've got user attributes in SAP, like their roles or other descriptive information about them, that still resides in SAP. When you enable SNC, you actually get a new configuration option for the user's account, and that's the ability to associate what they call an SNC identity, but what we refer to as the Active Directory identity for this solution. Okay. And so we actually go in there and enter a user's ID as they're known. Oftentimes with your Active Directory identity, you refer to it as your network identity. It's what a lot of people refer to it as. So you go put that Active Directory or network identity into the user's account. So when that authentication happens, it knows who's being authenticated by looking up who the network ID's account is associated with in SAP.
Oh, okay. So basically, if I historically have logged on via the SAP GUI using the user ID Kemp, right, then within the interface, the administrative interface, you would say, well, Kemp is going to be tom.kemp@centrify.com.
Correct.
And so simply doing that within the interface and installing a product then will facilitate our technology.
Right. Right. And that's literally the only configuration step you have for the end user. What I found for a lot of people is they immediately ask, okay, well, I've got 10 or 15,000 users. That's a lot of entry to go and put in. And while you still have the option to go and do this either through your central administration or through the individual server accounts, there actually is an SAP transaction, I believe it's SNC1, something the SAP audience will understand, that actually allows them to templatize the entry. So what I find is that whenever an SAP account was set up, it was often around the same time that the Active Directory account was set up, so they may actually share the same name already. And if that's the case, then I can automatically populate that lookup table in SAP with both the names and have it automatically populated, say for 90% of the population. Then I only have to go back and re-enter the 10%.
See, the cool thing about this is that, and we've had some customers have been able to get this up and going literally within hours, and because it just. I mean, can you talk a little bit about some of the customer, how fast they've been able to get this up and running?
Sure.
And it's probably just because of the inherent architecture of leveraging existing Active Directory, leveraging the existing SNC.
Right.
Et cetera.
Yeah, so if a typical pilot or proof of concept we would do with a customer is to take a couple of SAP servers and a few of the end users and actually set up this environment and get them single signing on in real life. And so what it involves is a few different pieces. One, I've got to install DirectControl and join that to Active Directory. And we provide tools and capabilities to make that very easy. We can scan the environment and make sure that it will integrate easily with Active Directory, and then it's literally a single command to join this server to Active Directory. The second thing we need to do is install the SAP Server agent. That's literally a set of files that gets laid down in the, that's a 5-minute exercise. And then what I need to do is configure NetWeaver to turn on SNC and to configure it to use our environment. That involves setting in the SAP profile a set of parameters. There's like 10 or 12 of them, and it requires a restart of the SAP server. So if this is a server that has end users on it, we may need to wait till there's a break to restart it. But the actual configuration literally takes just an hour or two, assuming we don't make any mistakes or we don't have to learn anything. It's very straightforward, half a day. To get a few users up and running. Then we've got to go into NetWeaver and associate a few accounts for end users to their SAP accounts, and that's it. They're up and signing on. So like I said earlier, where most of the work comes in is the change management and training the users how this new system is going to work, and that communication takes literally longer than integrating a single server.
That's cool. Yeah, it seems like it's such a much easier and seamless approach without making any changes to the underlying environment than what you get with kind of more your classical single sign-on, from what I've seen and what I've read is very cumbersome. So it sounds like literally a proof of concept would be a day's effort to get a dozen, 2 dozen, X number of people up and running. And single signing on into their SAP and getting the corresponding benefits of single sign-on and a single point of authentication, single point of policy. Now, in talking with you just relatively recently, it's interesting, it sounds like that some customers actually have a requirement that they don't want the silent authentication to occur. And so they, in fact, even though they want the environment Kerberized, they want to leverage their Active Directory, they still want the users to be able to specify their username and password. Can you talk about whether or not we can help address first of all, what are some of the scenarios that customers would want that capability? And then second, can we help them address that?
Yeah, I can give you a few examples of customers that have requested this. It may be that they are in a certain industry, like healthcare, or in particular anybody that requires FDA regulation. FDA regulations have been interpreted to mean that you cannot use silent sign-on. You have to use a username and password for anything like clinical trials data or other healthcare data. And so in those cases, they must be prompted for a username and password. Another scenario might be not the whole company, but maybe a division of the company, like the HR environment, where an internal security policy would be that end users need to log in with an actual username and password, even if they've already authenticated to the desktop. There's a school of thought that says that Kerberos is actually and silent sign-on is actually more secure, because if I lose control of a single desktop session, it's not as bad as losing control of a username and password, which can be reused over and over again. Kerberos tickets can't be reused. There's good replay attack prevention mechanisms. But it doesn't really matter. Whether or not you come into the school of thought that silent sign-on is the best or that using a username and password is best, we actually support both. And so built into our client agent is the ability to prompt a user for a username and password. And that can be configured on a per user basis, a per machine basis, or an Active Directory group basis. And we actually provide group policies to manage that in Active Directory.
That's great. Now, you talked about we support, because of SNC is a standard that SAP has had in place for the last 5 to 10 years or so. So it sounds like we do a good job of supporting the various flavors and versions of SAP. And it was what, 4 dot something and above?
4.0, it actually may be earlier than that, but I know for sure 4.0 and beyond. Most people have 4.6 and higher. Now there's been several versions in there. The most current version is 7 or 7.1, sometimes referred to as 2004 S. That's actually what we set up and tested with, but the interface hasn't changed since the 4.0 version. And so what we did is we went through, and one of the reasons this is so easy to set up is that SAP made it very straightforward by providing the S&C layer. The process for getting certified against S&C, however, is very rigorous. And you literally have to go through hundreds of automated and manual tests, and you need to go through code reviews by the actual engineers who built the S&C layer at SAP. And so it took us several months to get through that process. But as a result, now if you have any problem in your SAP environment and you raise a trouble ticket and it's found that it's related to, let's say, Centrify's agent or the S&C layer, SAP will support that as if it was their own product. They'll actually contact us in the back end, they'll still own the ticket. And that certification kind of gives you the peace of mind that this solution has passed SAP's rigorous standards and is supported by them.
It sounds like there's only very few products that have actually gotten the certification.
Yeah, as far as I know, there's been only about 3 or 4, only 2 of which actually provide this nice Kerberized approach. The other ones actually provide a proprietary PKI certificate-based approach, which is both more expensive and more complex to deploy.
Gotcha. So, and then in terms of the flavors of the operating system, we support, I assume, Solaris, Linux. I mean, so it's a pretty wide range.
We support the major versions that SAP supports in Linux and Unix, and that would be HPUX and Solaris and AIX, as well as SUSE and Red Hat.
Oh, that's great.
And those are the production environments, and the specific version numbers we have listed on our website, but we support the majority of the ones that SAP currently supports.
And then we support, from an AD perspective?
Active Directory, we support every version that's been released from 2000 through 2008, and Direct Control works with all of those.
And then on the Windows side, I assume just XP or
XP and Vista both. Yep. And it turns out that we can also make this work against the SAP GUI Java version, either on Windows or Mac.
Oh, that's great.
And we've had a few customers ask for that.
So now talk about what if people, oftentimes the alternative is someone trying to build this on their own.
True.
Okay, so talk about some of the advantages of what we offer versus trying to roll your own. Immediately it comes to mind, which is, you know, people say, well, Active Directory is just an LDAP directory, I can just talk LDAP. And little do they know that Active Directory is not a single box, but it actually is a highly replicated environment with multiple domain controllers, for, you know, cross-forest, one-way trust, et cetera.
Right.
So I assume that we handle all that stuff. No matter how complex their AD environment is, just like we do from an OS, we work pretty well, very well.
Right. When we join a Unix or Linux machine to Active Directory, it behaves just like an XP machine does when you join it to Active Directory. It knows about sites and services. It can automatically discover the nearest domain controller. It can fail over from one domain controller to another. And all of that happens automatically through the technology we provide in Direct Control. There's actually a couple of other challenges if you want to try to roll your own. First of all, you don't get any of the security features of the OS layer that we provide. We provide access control, authorization,
and the authorization, which you talked about before, which I really didn't think about, but you're right, because a lot of administrators need to physically log onto that system, and through Direct Authorize, which comes standard with Direct Control, you can actually create roles and rights specific to which commands they can execute, when they can log in, how they can log in. Of course, we also provide through Direct Audit the ability to audit all their commands as well. So there's obviously, so definitely agree with you, there's so much value because we control and secure the OS stack. So.
Now there's some additional technology challenges as well, and the main one is Kerberos. So some operating systems provide a Kerberos stack, or you can get a third-party one and build your own and try to get it integrated. We've actually had a few customers that have tried that, and the anecdotal evidence is that it's extremely difficult. In fact, none of our customers so far have been successful in getting that to work on their own.
So they're trying to like download MIT Kerberos,
and
compile
get it to build. and to make it work with SNC, which requires downloading C code, building it on your platform, fixing all the bugs. And it's still not supported by SAP, even if they do that.
Yeah, and so there's the lack of support and certification, and then trying to get that to talk to a complex AD environment.
And to keep that up and running as you patch the system, as you move to different platforms. Many of our customers don't just use one flavor of Unix, they use multiple.
So they could have
Solaris, NAX, and Linux.
Then they could have a whole mix of them, and then they acquire another company that's running it on Linux or whatever, yeah.
And this is all the same approach, it all looks the same on every machine. And one thing that the SAP has done, and this is not a technical challenge, but it is a support challenge, is that for this client agent, which bridges SNC, and this server agent, which bridges SNC, they don't support the use of the open source product that they give. They require, for supporting purposes, for you to get it from a third-party vendor. And so they actually built this and so we've had some customers where they've used it in the Windows environment, where I don't need this agent, because if it's SAP running on Windows, then you can actually make this work a little bit more straightforward. If it runs on Unix, or if you use SAP GUI, SAP actually in their support site says you need to go through a third party. And so we are one of the few third-party providers that they recommend.
So OS level capabilities that you don't get, talking to a complex AD, having a certified solution, be able to get support. Are there any other things that come to mind that?
Well, and the fact that we've done this a few times now. So our support organization and our consulting organization and myself provide a lot of expertise around how to do this. And I can assure you that the amount of pain it would go through to do this on your own would cost more than doing a proof of concept with us to be able to compare the difference.
So just a few miscellaneous other questions right here. What about SAP NetWeaver for J2EE and Portal? Because they may be running that within their environment as well.
Yeah, we could do a whole chalk talk on that as well. But at a basic level, what happens is that SNC is for the client-server distributed computer environments. SNC is not the security layer for the J2EE server. So Portal and other web applications that run on NetWeaver J2EE actually use standard J2EE mechanisms for authentication.
So we could probably leverage the technology, because we've got great J2EE integration technology into AD.
And the basic two approaches are that we can set up Apache as a reverse proxy, which is the way many of these Portal environments are set up, and we can put authentication there. And then NetWeaver can be configured to trust the proxy for authentication. You can also configure the NetWeaver server to directly integrate with Kerberos, and we can provide the direct control environment for Kerberos. So there's a couple of technical approaches. We'd be happy to talk to customers about that. But it is a different approach than SNC.
Okay, well, I think you've gone through my checklist of things that I wanted to ask you about. So this is a good presentation. Is there anything that you want to conclude with, or anything else you want to add that you don't think that you've brought up? I mean, so you've done a nice job of giving the chalktalk architecture. You've given some great reasons why you should go with our solution in terms of the capabilities. We've talked about the features and benefits. Anything else that you want to add?
Well, just to bump up another level, I think at the technology layer, it's a very solid technical approach. We've had a lot of good feedback from customers that say it's very straightforward. It's something that once they're shown how to do it, they can do themselves and manage on their own. But the technology aside, I think there's a couple of areas where we really differentiate ourselves as a product and as a company. The first one is pricing. Because this is such a single architecture approach to doing single sign-on and to securing the OS, if you were to buy all the capabilities that we described here separately from other vendors, or even from a portfolio from another vendor, the cost would be a much larger amount, both in terms of the complexity of deploying it as well as the licensing. And because we put this all into a single architecture, the support for us has become something that we can really provide in a very robust, deep way. So we have customers that call us for help on configuration, help for any type of rollout advice. We've got professional services, all of which make us a team that focuses on solutions like this and provide really the best one-stop shop for the expertise around this. So the technology is great. It's something that SAP endorses based on our certification, but we're also a great company to do business with, and very cost effective as well.
Yeah, no, sounds like it. The concept of embracing extending as opposed to using a proprietary stack to deliver single sign-on, I think that's always been our core value proposition, and that, from an OS level, we've moved up the stack into the web area. Now we're providing the same capability for packaged apps such as SAP. So thanks a lot, Corey. And so that concludes yet another Centrify Video Chalk Talk. So stay tuned for more Chalk Talks coming your way on our website. And again, thanks a lot for joining us. Bye-bye.